I have a very interesting question for you.
Okay. I'll be the judge of that.
I wanted to ask, what does pocket mean to you?
I put this snare on because it just looks so beautiful.
Is that the field snare or the...
Yeah, it's a field. Dude, it's such a ridiculous drum, hey. I had it tuned really low, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty low. And then I was like, I wonder how low this is. And so, like, normally if I'm tuning like a regular snare, like a 14.6.5 or whatever, low, the kind of first overtone would be like, around about like an A would be like really low.
Yeah.
And I had this thing at like, it was like an E below that. Like it was just like, it was the lowest I've ever tuned a snare, and it still sounded like a drum. And I'm like, how is that even possible? It was just ridiculous.
How do you muffle it when you tune it that low?
Oh, heavily. Quite often it'd be an O-ring. I've got like a big O-ring that I cut out of an old snare head. So it's like, I think I had like a 10-inch hole, so it's like 2 inches the whole way around.
Yeah.
So it's normally that, and then normally even a couple of full moon gels, like actually holding the O-ring down.
Wow.
Yeah, but still like, there's still a lot of note.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that kind of first overtone or whatever, but there's still a lot of note. It's and then like the wires are just nuts on this thing.
What kind of wires?
Oh, they're just the standard A&F wires, but they just get so much like. They can be a little bit papery. I actually want to try some kind of darker sounding wires on it. Like they just have like such a nice length, like such a nice decay to them.
Yeah.
You can't tune it super high because it's a really thin shell, but even when you tune it up, the crack, especially with like the big tall wooden hoops, the crack is just like, it's just the most interesting sort of crack that I've heard come from a snare. It's really crazy.
Your sounds are ridiculous, man. Like every sound I hear from you is just... It's nasty.
I spent time on it, man.
Yeah.
Like, I did a session yesterday for a friend, the same dude that I was tracking for when I was talking to you the other day.
Yeah.
And like, I just went with the weirdest sound, and like, I ended up having to like do like almost a proper drum mix on it before I delivered the files to him. But like, it was just such a weird sound. I'm like, I want this to sound somewhere between acoustic and electric.
Yeah.
And I also want it to sound kind of like nothing else. And it took forever to get it right, man. But I got a message from him this morning saying, man, that snare sound is wicked. And I'm like, good, because it took me fucking forever. It took me a really long time.
That's awesome, man. And that's a funny thing. We kind of approach that differently. You get way more adventurous with all the different types of things you're trying to do sound-wise, and it's really inspiring. It's cool.
More for me, it's like there's heaps of session drummers that go into studios and use whatever sound the engineer pulls.
Yeah.
Right? So like I'm just like, seeing as I'm the engineer on these sessions as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and essentially I guess like the drum producer in a lot of ways. I just kind of go ham on it. I just want to deliver sounds that they're not going to get elsewhere. And also because so many things, man, like so many things I'm tracking now, like you're barely playing. Like you're playing very little at all times.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I'd rather spend, just blow through a couple of quick takes, put it together properly, and then just actually spend time, mixing it essentially. Because I don't think there's anything worse than people like getting a drum session from someone and then feeling like, okay, well, I guess the parts are there, but now we need to like make it sound right in our session before we can even move on and track anything else. So I'm trying to cut that process out and just give them what I would think would be like mix ready, but past that also.
Exactly.
So I do, just fixing up stuff, corrective EQ and that sort of thing. But also now, like, I even go to the extent now of actually, cutting out toms, anything that I would do to kind of get it like 50% mixed.
Yep.
If I was mixing the track.
I have a question. When you're like doing that heavy processing, how much of that is reversible or like in the box versus out of the box?
It's all in the box. For like, I don't have a ton of outboard gear because it's kind of impossible to run that on your own anyway when you're tracking drums.
Sure.
Because my stuff's all still in the control room. Like, it's still in a different room to me. But also for that reason. So, like, if they say, could you maybe just send that, you know, like, more raw because we want to do something crazy with it or whatever, then, you know, I can just turn some plugins off and give them new stems. Yep. But I don't go so far that it's like the sounds are like completely mangled. It's like I take them 50% in the direction that I think the artist wants, or the producer wants, and then, you know, they could easily, you know, they could easily reverse some things, but most of the time it's not like I'm adding tons of bottom end or adding tons of top end or anything like that. Yep. So, you know, I don't give them something that's just like ridiculously hi-fi that they're going to have to try really hard to make small if that's what they want.
Before we get into your sound and like all this amazing stuff you do, can you tell me like about your story? Like what is your story and what is your story on the drums and the studio and everything?
Yeah, okay. I don't know if it's very exciting. Sure. Let me sit up straighter. I'm slouching. My story is I have terrible posture behind the drum set. That's the main part of my story.
Creates sloppy beats.
Yeah, exactly. Sloppy beats, sloppy back. I've been playing since I was like, well, forever. I've like quite literally been playing for my entire life because my dad played drums way, way, way back in the day, so I always had a kit.
Yeah.
And I also grew up on a farm out in the country, so like I could play whenever. So I was like super lucky, apart from the fact that I didn't take advantage of that at all and like never practiced. So yeah, I've been playing since I was like 4 or 5, which makes it like 30 years. Jesus. I should have done so much more with my life, Dimitri.
We are twins.
Yeah, so I played in bands. I did pretty much just the original band thing, like bands that I was actually kind of like part of the writing process and that sort of thing. I've only ever really played a handful of cover gigs. Just never really interested me. And then I got into the studio game. A studio that I'd actually recorded in a couple of times. The owner of that place took over another studio and he was going to get my now business partner, who I'm still playing a band with, who I was playing in a band with at the time, he was going to get him to run the studio for him while he was running a second place. And I just quit my job, working retail at a music store. And I just said to my business partner, I'm like, well, the amount of money that he wants you to turn over running the place, like, let's just buy the business off him, run it ourselves. And at that point, man, I didn't really know how to record shit. So if you want to get good at recording, make it so that you have to pay rent pretty soon by recording things. And then you will have no choice but to get decent at recording things.
That is incredible, man. Wow. Jeez.
So we spent like a few months actually renovating the place. Like obviously, like it was a fully functioning studio, but we just wanted to do a ton of stuff. So we did a whole bunch of acoustic treatment, completely redid the control room, like built like a false ceiling in there with a whole bunch of acoustic like hangers and all this crazy stuff, and treated the live room really heavily. And then while we were doing that for like 12, 14 hours a day. And then I was going home just like religiously watching tutorials, YouTubing.
Yeah.
Hard.
So when did all this start to happen?
Start of 2012. Yeah. Yes.
You didn't have any recording or studio engineering experience before then?
No, not really. Like I'd done a bunch of work in studios. Like I'd played on a bunch of stuff and I'd recorded, you know, multiple times with my different bands and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I'd started doing like a little bit of demoing for the band that myself and my business partner were in, but dude, I was bad at it. I just didn't know what I was doing. But I was like, I always enjoyed the recording process, probably more so than the gigging process. So I just thought, well, I don't have a job right now because I hated my old job, so should probably do something else. Little did I know I'd still be broke 10 years later.
We'll cut that out.
You have to leave that in now. You have to leave in, I'd still be broke 10 years later. We'll cut that out.
I can't believe that you just dove right into it like that. That's incredible.
If I hadn't done it that way, I just would have never done it. Like there was no way I was going to go and study like recording at like a a university or an audio college or anything, because I don't enjoy learning that way, because you kind of always just are going to have to learn, like it's kind of like a lowest common denominator style of learning where you just kind of have to learn at the pace of everyone else, and which is great if you're, like if you're struggling with something, and it also takes a ton of pressure off, which, that was tough at the start. Like I was super stressed trying to get my shit together, figuring out how to do this stuff.
Yeah.
Luckily, my business partner though was like very good at it, and he used to lecture it at an audio college as well. So
great.
But yeah, that's not how I learn. Like I learn by teaching myself and by figuring out how to do things on my own.
Exactly. Yeah, which is great. And you did it really fast because, I probably became aware of you in 2017, and that was 5 years after you had the studio. Like, it was only 5 years, you know what I mean?
Well, I think I started kind of recording myself and, trying to do drum videos and stuff in about 2015. But I definitely wasn't good at the sound thing then. I was just kind of setting things up so that I could play drums, basically. The sound thing came about a little bit later than that and sort of became my main focus for the whole process.
Maybe relating to your style now, or maybe not, what is your philosophy for practicing, and how did you practice to get where you are and the way you play?
Practice is a weird one for me because, like, I've never been the sort of person to kind of sit down and like grind for 6 hours at a time.
Yeah.
If anything, I've done that with like drum mixing more than anything else.
Right.
I actually do practice a lot more now than I used to, because I just kind of always have a kit set up, but I'm always practicing like through microphones, like through a full recording rig with in-ears in, because that's just kind of like, that's my whole focus, is like, I want to sound good on the other side of the glass. So, I mean, obviously I still have to work on, the facility of the actual playing side of things to try and sound good on the other side of the glass. But like I try and hear myself back through mics and stuff all the time, because that's really the playing that I'm interested in doing. I did spend a lot of time, probably 18 months or so ago now, like really reworking my technique, because I was just, you get those plateaus where you just like, I either keep grinding away at this and get marginally better, or I actually start fresh. And dude, I completely reworked my grip.
Really?
Yeah, in like, especially in my left hand, but I spent a lot of time honing my right hand to try and figure out how to make the stick feel better in my right hand so that I could then take that across to my left hand. And within the space of a week, I gained like 30 or 40 BPM on my singles.
Holy, what?
just because I just lined up my technique. Like I just actually sat down, and like I'm talking like, there was a handful of days there where I did 5, 6, 7 hours on the pad.
Yeah.
But it was just this thing where it was such a simple fix. I don't know why I hadn't done it.
So could I ask what that was? What did you do that was so different?
It was completely changing my fulcrum point and the direction of the stick in my hand. So moving from sort of playing like a first knuckle on, I have no idea where this sits in the frame. There we go. Let's put it in my face. First knuckle on my middle finger to actually pulling the stick like back into my second knuckle and even further back. Because I've always played from the wrist. Like I've never been a fingery player.
Sure.
Especially for the sort of the groove stuff I do, because like it's all controlled strokes.
Controlled strokes for ghost notes, and also for the low tune stuff, you're not gonna get the bounce.
Exactly, right? So yeah, so a lot of the sounds I play with is like, you don't get rebound out of the drum. So forget about kind of, doing that whole bouncy free stroke thing. Yeah, so I spent a ton of time rejigging that and just getting the stick straighter in my arm as opposed to being out the side. So I don't know, I just see that a lot where the stick's kind of like out the side of the palm, whereas I just try to spend a lot of time getting it back closer to, I call that the hand bum.
Yeah.
the closer to the crease there in the middle of the hand, which just like lined it up and just made my wrists more efficient.
Wow.
And so like, just something as simple as single strokes just became like a more direct motion. So there wasn't anything in the way of the stick coming back. So then when it became more of like a kind of having the stick out in your fingers and like letting the stick do the work, like kind of like a full stroke in a controlled stroke fashion, the stick just wanted to move with my wrists. And in turn, my wrist wanted to move with the stick. And yeah, it just like the whole thing just got so much easier. Because before that, I think I developed it from the way I play backbeats with like a real kind of whippy sort of lateral motion almost. So the stick kind of was like throwing in a bit of an oval.
Yeah.
Like this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I still do that if I'm playing like big backbeats and I kind of get that molar whippy thing. Mm-hmm. But now if I'm playing like, if I'm really trying to control things, the stick, it's almost like more like having the grip between your knuckles, like between your fingers, like getting the stick that straight so that whatever you do at the wrist level translates to the tip of the stick.
Right. That's a good point. Is like I do teach that, where depending on what you do with your fingers, you can have the stick move 1-to-1 with your wrist.
Yeah, and that's the whole goal of the controlled stroke, of like really controlling the dynamics of the stroke and the direction of the tip of the stick.
Right.
Whatever small amount of force you apply at essentially the hinge. Because I mean, for a lot of those controlled strokes, the kind of fulcrum, the balance point doesn't even really come into it. Because I spend a lot of time actually playing, like especially with my hi-hats. Like I play just with the stick kind of in the back of my hand, and the front of my hand's really loose. Like both fingers are almost off the stick.
I got you.
Because I'm literally trying to whatever motion I put in place at the wrist, and I guess kind of at the forearm as well, that translates to the tip of the stick. So you'll if you would actually look back at some of my videos, you would see like both my front fingers hanging off the stick while I'm playing hi-hats.
So was that your old technique or your current technique?
That's my current technique.
Okay, yeah.
Like actually just putting the stick in my hand, because it takes a variable out, which is fingers. Fingers don't need to be there for most of the playing that we do. Like it really can be a totally controlled wrist stroke. And then what that does is it kind of makes you reassess the way you actually apply your fingers to playing as well. Like you deliberately engage your fingers if you're trying to play doubles or you're trying to play like faster singles or something, as opposed to it being like, so you actually like draw a decisive line in the sand when it comes to technique and go, okay, cool, now I need to switch gears. And it's not like you change the whole position of the stick or anything. Like you kind of switch gears and you start to involve the finer motor skills when you need them, as opposed to them kind of always flopping around trying to, anxiously waiting for their time to shine.
You're controlling it with the right fulcrums and leverage at the correct times.
Yeah.
And developing that so that when you're ready to call upon the fingers, you're using them correctly at that time and then not using them incorrectly at other times.
Yeah, it all just goes back to control. So it always goes back to making the decision to do something and it not being a default setting that you have to try and turn off. Like I'm just basically, everything I do, I'm trying to deliberately turn on the technique that I'm using for the particular purpose. And it's not obviously as regimented as that, right? Like it becomes an internalized, natural, natural thing to do. But when you first start approaching it, like it can be a little bit awkward. But also, man, one of the main reasons for kind of getting the stick in the back of my hand like that is like it loosens up the front of my hand. So like having like a fulcrum, like a tighter grip not a tighter grip, but like a more closed grip in the front of my hand, I just like that really screws my wrist up. Like it really kind of affects the motion of my whole wrist and forearm. Right. So getting it in the back and just being super loose in the front of hand just completely loosens all of those, all the muscles and tendons or whatever through my wrist and up into my forearm.
Yeah. As you're describing this, what the image that pops into my head is the Jim Chapin videos of the way his grip looks as he's playing. You can see that looseness in the front.
Right. Okay.
As he's doing that motion. That's what I'm imagining.
You know what, man? It was all kind of like theory for a little while, and then I had proof of concept at the start of this year. I was telling you about that drum and bass show that I did?
Yes.
That was an hour set of, a lot of kind of halftime dubsteppy tempo, but also a lot of like 175 D&B tempo. So eighth notes at 175 for at least 30 minutes of that set.
Yeah.
And I did 6 weeks of kind of learning the tunes and rehearsals, and we did probably a month of pretty regular rehearsals, and then we did a couple of days of production rehearsals where we ran the set like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
And my hands didn't conk out on me at all, and I didn't get one blister for the entire process. So I'm like, okay, cool, this is kind of proof of concept for this whole technique thing. Like it actually feels like it's working.
That sounds like that was intense too. I remember you were telling me about that as you were doing it.
It was gnarly, man. It was really intense. We were actually meant to be doing another show in like a little under a month, but obviously that's been cancelled. Right. As well as haircuts. Haircuts have also been cancelled.
I know, that's what I keep saying is the worst part about trying to start a YouTube show during a pandemic is that you can't get a haircut.
I mean, you can just go through frame by frame and Photoshop a nicer hairstyle onto me, right? That's a thing you can do.
And I keep making that same joke in all these interviews, and I'm not sure when I'm actually going to include it. So You might hear me say that same line to Tim, but that's the one that I include because I don't even know. How about, can you tell me about your influences and how you came to find what your sound is? Whether it's your influences or what you did for yourself. Like, how did you get to become Brody Simpson on the drums?
Wow, I don't know, it's a long process. Well, my parents met in 1972.
Wow.
Influences. I mean, the main influence for me now is sound development.
Yeah.
It's not really a playing influence so much as like I'm influenced by the sounds of different genres of music and how to replicate them in an organic way.
Yeah. That's a really cool thing about what you're doing. I'm the same way where I'm constantly studying production and not even drums that much at the moment.
Yeah.
But then you take that and you're then exploring ways to recreate that on an acoustic kit at the same time, which is incredible.
I think it's because like when you start working, like when music becomes your daily job,
Yeah.
you enjoy it in different ways. So like for me to like really listen to something now, I'm not listening for like, oh, this is, this tune's got a bit of a vibe. I'm like, if I'm like actually like sitting and consciously listening to music now, it's got to be something that I actually have like a real connection with.
Yeah.
Like, on like a very sort of emotional and personal level. Like that's what I'm looking for, because that is when I listen to something like that, that's my only escape from the analysis world of working on music on a daily basis.
Gotcha.
And like I will analyze everything to its like minuscule, annoying, just like tumultuous degree. So like that's the music I listen to now, is that kind of music that like actually does something for me on that kind of level.
Right.
So outside of that, I'm really focused on the sound side of things and the production stuff. So anything else I listen to is going to be like I'm listening to it from like a critical analysis level where I'm trying to study it and learn what things sound like and why they sound that way and why they deliberately have made them sound that way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like a big influence for me. And then with the sound side of it in mind, how do I actually use the things I know as, my craft as a drummer? How do I use the facilities that I've developed there to actually replicate those sounds at an organic level? Which, like that's just a constant experimentation process. In terms of playing though, like I would say I'm not heavily influenced by other drummers as much as I would have been when I was, younger. But like starting off, it was the typical stuff at the time. Like I was listening to, Green Day and Blink-182 and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is like my playing couldn't be further from that. And I think even at the time was quite far from that.
Sure.
A big influence on me, like when I was really young, they were like my favorite band for a very long time. There's an Australian band called Silverchair who... They were like 14 when they got like massive. They won like a competition here. They were writing great songs even then, and then they just developed into this whole other beast. And their drummer was a dude called Ben Gillies, and he back in the day was just like a full basher. Like he used to break snare hoops. Right? Like not heads, hoops. And that's always kind of been a goal of mine, that I really at some point would like to break a snare hoop. Yeah, he was like just a machine, like a real basher, but as they progressed as a band from like 14-year-olds, so they were like, probably 5 or 6 years older than me. As they progressed, like my taste kind of progressed with them, and he started becoming like a much more tasteful player and kind of bringing more of like a, like a Ringo kind of influence to his drum parts and his fills and things like that. So that was a big influence on me back in the day. And then I kind of moved on from that sort of vibe, and really, man, I could like the thing is I couldn't actually even tell you the names of the drummers who have like in a lot of ways I couldn't tell you the names of the drummers who have influenced me, because I was listening to the bands on like a songwriting level, not so much a drum level. And so basically, like if the drums didn't stand out as having been a distraction to the song, then I liked that drummer kind of thing,
Yeah.
Or distraction from the song, I guess.
Yeah.
But, in more recent years, guys like Chris Dave, who are doing, the kind of jazz infused kind of neo soul hip hop thing, and that less so on like a musical, like listening to the song and loving and feeling the song level, and more so on like that seems like a really fun way to play drums. So I think any kind of influence, like whatever you take from it and however you come across it, every single influence is as valid as any other influence.
What you take from it and then the work you put in yourself to take it somewhere is where things become special to me, you know?
Yeah, like you do actually have to kind of choose to make an influence a valid influence on your playing or on your sound. Mm-hmm. You need to take from it what is appropriate to take from it. And like I'm kind of pretty pragmatic in my approach to that sort of thing. Like I'm not practicing left foot clave because it's not something that I'm going to be using ever. Right? If someone wants me to play left foot clave on a tune, I'm going to play everything else and then we're going to overdub the clave, right? that's and I guarantee anyone that's coming to me for left foot clave isn't actually sure what left foot clave is. There's plenty of other people they should be going to for that. I've got Juan Carlito's number. I'll send it over to him. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Man, I don't know. It's like, it's such a roundabout journey. Like I never had that, like I listened to this one particular style of music and here's my top 5 drummers and I'm basing my progression as a player and my sound on how those people have done it in the past.
Sure.
It's always been a much more roundabout thing because I really try and approach the whole thing way more holistically in terms of like, we have a song, that's number 1.
Yeah.
The vocal is probably number 2. And then everything from there needs to play a supporting role and do as little as possible to enhance everything else that's happening and never detract away from the message of the song.
That's great. I mean, that's a beautiful thing. And it shows in the way that you play.
I hope so, man. Like it's just such a trial and error process as well.
Yeah. It takes experience to know what the right choices are for the song.
Yeah, for sure, man. And also, I think I mentioned it to you before, like what maybe not to present the client with in terms of like, there might be something that's like a really cool idea, but it's going to be like a real nightmare to make happen. And it might not even land in the end anyway. So like you kind of need to, you kind of wise up to like what is an appropriate thing to present to the producer or the songwriter to get this song done. Because, there is that process of like things do need to be done in a timely fashion as well.
True. Oh, I have a very interesting question for you. Okay.
I'll be the judge of that.
I'm not sure. I'm really curious what you think about this or what your take on this would be. I wanted to ask, what does pocket mean to you?
It means a creaky drum throne. My desk chair is like, it's like quite melodic, spinning side to side. Pocket. I think pocket is the culmination of all of the important parts of playing a groove. So when you actually get everything working in tandem, then I feel like that's what pocket is. So it's like, it's your time, it's your dynamics, and in turn, I guess the time and the dynamics are really what create the feel. Like your choice of note placement, whether or not it's like a dead straight thing or it's like a super hard swung thing or somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And then the dynamics that you choose from limb to limb and sound source to sound source to enhance to either enhance the dynamic range and the ebb and flow of the groove or completely delete that entirely. Like sometimes the best dynamic is no dynamic.
Sure.
Yeah. As the old saying goes, what do you mean play dynamically? I'm playing as loud as I can.
That's a good point. I mean, I did exactly that on a session. Actually, the first episode of this series that I started, if you watched the first episode.
Yeah. The hi-hat thing, right?
Yeah, I was doing heavier quarter notes on the downbeats, and that's not what it wanted. It wanted more straight for like a driving feeling. And that's
Yeah.
what was necessary
Dude,
for that pocket.
that's such a huge part of what I teach as well, actually, hi-hat dynamics, or
Yes.
whatever riding surface you're playing on, dynamics, because they really set up, in a lot of ways, they set up the kind of appropriate pocket for any given genre of music.
Yeah.
So like if you're playing, I don't think it's a style of music that people associate with pocket, but if you're playing like straight up like Ramonesy punk, your hi-hats need to be like they need to be like, jackhammer hi-hats, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Otherwise, if you start to like really emphasize the downbeat and, like you had kind of have that molery down and up thing,
Yep.
it starts to not sound like punk. It starts to sound like modern rock.
Yeah.
So like, I think that's all part of it. So there's an appropriate kind of area of pocket for any given genre. And I kind of go so far now as to say like the way you deliberately play for the style of recording that you're doing, and not terms of the style of music, but the style of like how are you actually capturing these sounds and how are these sounds going to be processed. If you can look at it from that like real top down holistic level, then you can really emphasize the processing side of that by how you play. So something as simple as like, if you wanted to have a groove that kind of breathed on the upbeats and pumped on the upbeats, it's like a 4 on the floor thing, and you want the hats to kind of peak up in the middle.
Yep.
I wouldn't play the hats louder on the upbeats. I would play real straight hi-hats and let the compression on the drum bus take over and duck the hi-hats on all the kick and snare hits, and then pump the hi-hats back up in between, right?
And that's brilliant and kind of like a next level thing that only comes if you're also the producer, and you would think of that sort of thing. That's amazing.
Well, I think it comes from having been the producer, and then is something that you can actually apply to something that you're not producing, something that you're just playing on. Actually, like quite literally on a Zoom session I did the other day, with a client in Sydney, he said, like, I like the way that you're emphasizing the upbeats on the hats. I said, I'm not. I said, the kick and snare are de-emphasizing the downbeats on the hats. And yet, like, that's the sort of thing that I'm keeping in mind at all times. So I'd like that sort of, to me, is like as big a part of pocket as anything else. Like, how is this actually going to sound in 1, 2, or 3 steps time?
Sure, the context of the final recording or performance, like there's a different context there. Whether it's with other musicians or even like different rooms and stages affect how you play and sit with a band and stuff like that.
Well, I guess a good way to kind of break that down then, like the pocket, like having a deep pocket or a good pocket or empty pockets, as the case may be for most drummers. I think that is a lot to do with adjusting your feel, your time, and your dynamics for the situation.
You can't just have a pocket. It's something that you need to create custom.
Yeah, for sure. Because I feel like there's, across the board in all instruments, like there are amazing players who excel at particular styles and particular feels that would sound bad on the wrong record because they're not the right player for that record, right?
Right, yeah.
And obviously that doesn't make them a bad player. That means that the person producing it maybe chose the wrong player, right? So not every pocket and not every way that someone applies their time and their feel to something is going to work on every record.
Yeah.
And I guess as you kind of get further along in your career and you develop more of your own sound, more of your own pocket, then you should be looking to maybe try and have people want to work with you for that particular thing.
Right.
Which is a stage that I'm really at right now. Like I'm really trying to, I'm not like throwing my name in every single circle to try and get work from every single far-reaching, part of the musical galaxy. I'm really trying to get people that see what I do as being the right thing for their project to want to work with me.
Because you're Brody Simpson and you get to be Brody Simpson, and that's a thing that people want. Like,
I get to be is generous.
Brody Simpson is the right drummer for this. I can also say that, like, I could be producing something and I'd be like, this calls for Brody Simpson.
Man, that's a big thing. Like, especially being a producer.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like trying to decide whether or not you'd be better off getting someone else to come in and track the stuff. So like my business partner and myself work on a lot of projects where like we're working with a singer in the exact same way that you do.
Yeah.
Where you're working with a singer-songwriter and you actually end up kind of arranging and playing all of the other instruments on the project.
Happens a lot. It happens a lot.
Yeah. And a lot of the time, the only reason you're doing that is that the artist probably doesn't have a budget to bring in a whole bunch of other session musicians, right? So there's been many projects that I've kind of been involved with as a producer that I've ended up playing and even doing backing vocals and that sort of stuff on, where if I'd had the choice, I would have gotten different people in, because it just wasn't... Yeah. I kind of really had to really sort of squeeze myself into filling that role properly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just, like, I've tracked a whole bunch of like metal records and stuff like that, which, 4 or 5 years ago I was much more comfortable with, but now, like, I can get by, but I don't think in that way as a drummer anymore.
Right. Yeah. It's a different modality.
Yeah, it's an entirely different approach to the instrument, and also to writing parts. Like, so what I would hear is like an appropriate fill to go from metal verse A into metal chorus A is not something that a metal drummer would probably do.
Right.
So therefore, I am kind of naturally and, without really having a whole lot of control over it, unless I like think, okay, shit, I need to switch into metal drummer mode, I will probably play an inappropriate fill. I guess staying in finding a lane that obviously you can swerve in and out of pretty bloody regularly, to be honest, but like there's got to be things that you don't do. If someone comes to me and says, hey, I've got like a hard bop record that I need drums on, I'll be like, sweet, go and find a good bop drummer, because that ain't me. That'd just be doing a disservice to everyone in the process. And the adage of like under promise, over deliver is a great way to work.
Yeah.
Like, don't oversell your abilities and then leave the client being like a little bit disappointed with what you actually deliver to them. And that would be deliberately choosing to play on records that you're not equipped to play on.
And that's all really wise,
I have my moments. It's not very often. The scope of the subject is like vast.
Yes.
Like really vast. And I think any kind of part of the process of music creation is like, it can be approached so many thousands of ways by so many thousands of different individuals that there is no right answer.
There's no right answer, but there's some pretty damn good ones.
There are. I always just go back to like, it's not right or it's not wrong, it's appropriate.
Right.
And for any style of music or any production, like working on an acoustic track and finding just the maddest Moog bass tone. It might be right in terms of like it's a sick bass tone, but is it appropriate for the tune, right? And no, it's not appropriate for the tune.
Right.
It might be, but it's probably not appropriate for the tune.
Now I want to do that though.
Hey.
Now I want to do an acoustic track with some Moog bass. I have a freaking modular Moog over here, right?
I saw some pictures of that. That's crazy. I've got like one sub fatty, and I barely use it because, dude, every time I plug a synth in, I twiddle knobs for like 4 hours and I get nothing done because it's just too much fun. And because it's such like a new instrument for me, it's like, holy shit, if you do this, that happens and it sounds ridiculous. Yeah. I spend most of my time like making like 70s kung fu clap sounds. They're a real time suck, man. And especially modular, dude.
Exactly, yeah. Oh. And I've spent tons of time studying synths, mostly in the box, and learning how to get them to really be dialed in for everything and what I want, and design all sorts of kinds of sounds. To be honest, the modular Moog here, I've used it more in the past couple weeks just to turn on to have some background lights than I've actually used it in recordings.
Dude, I seriously exactly the same thing. Every time I want like a nice photo of my control room, the Moog goes front and center and I turn it on.
I'm not even kidding though. It's beautiful in these videos. It's like ridiculous. You should see what I did the other day. It's ridiculous.
Right.
But I haven't actually recorded with it. I barely recorded with it, man. That's pretty funny. I've found like a similar thing where I know that I'm getting a good sound pretty quickly with a microphone, whatever instrument I'm recording, but I know that the magic happens in the mix.
Dude, for sure. Like, the idea of finding like the perfect vocal microphone is more about finding the microphone, not the microphone that sounds done. It's finding the microphone that doesn't bring up issues with the vocal. It doesn't accentuate the sibilance.
Yeah.
It's not there's not too much proximity effect for if you're trying to record like a really close vocal. You don't want a mic that's just going to boom out and be crazy, right? Like if you're trying to get that real intimate, close vibe.
Yep.
The perfect microphone is the thing that will give you the most maneuverability as you progress further with the production. So that's the reason I use like a D112 kick drum mic on floor tom most of the time.
Yes. Yeah, I knew that about you.
Yeah, the cymbal bleed is infinitely more pleasant sounding in that microphone than it is in like a 421.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense, especially for the floor tom. And the isolation thing for your sound also makes total sense. And it's, that's a funny thing. It's the opposite for me. Although I might want more isolation than my current mic gets on the kick. I'm using a RE20.
Yeah.
But everything, which is fun, which is good. Most of the sound that I get is more natural, and I want to capture the whole thing kind of holistically.
You do a lot with that 77, right? Ribbon?
Yeah, I have been using that. Honestly, I only mix it in a little bit.
Right.
As a solo thing, it sounds awesome. It has a lot of vibe. Like, that one's a lot of character.
Yeah.
If I had to pick the bare minimum number of mics, it would be a kick mic and overheads, clean overheads, and that's it. Like, just to capture the whole sound of the kit. Honestly, that's almost like what I prefer. If I don't need tom mics for a track, I don't even use them. Like, I don't put them up or I don't use them. And I barely like a snare mic sound. It's funny because, like, I just get the sound that I want from the overheads capturing the natural sound of how I play.
And especially if you're going for a more natural, organic kit sound, then for sure. Like, I do find myself using, like, normally 1, 2, 3. Well, if I'm just doing, like, the setup I have now, kick, snare, floor tom, and a couple of cymbals.
Yeah.
For the thing, the sounds that I'm usually kind of doing now. Like right now, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
9 mics up. But I would tend to put more. 1, 2, 3. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 9. Right. I would tend to put more mics up for a session that I'm delivering to someone else to mix because I want to give them options.
Right.
But what I do now is I actually like kind of say to them, hey, this is kind of the configuration I used, or like the way that I kind of, when I finished off the sounds to send them through, like these are the rough levels I was using each track at.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how I mixed them to make it work that way, you know?
That makes sense. Yeah. That's really interesting. What do I see a mic that's kind of over top of your ride cymbal?
Yeah, so I can't really move the camera, but
That's
up
okay.
here I've got a stereo pair of AKG 414s.
Yeah.
So the C414B-ULS. So it's like I think it's like the 90s model, 90s to early 2000s model. So they're a little bit smoother in the top end, I think, than like the newer XLS models.
Gotcha.
And then in the middle of the kit, I have an AEA R84.
Oh, I see what's going on. Okay, so like a mono overhead and then a stereo.
Yeah,
pair.
mono overhead and stereo, but they're all pretty narrow, but kind of facing out.
Yes.
And the mono overhead is just kind of facing straight over the middle of the kick and the snare. I actually did originally put the mono overhead up to pick up a little bit more sticking off the ride in like a real kind of lo-fi vibe for the center image.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm liking the 77 for.
Yeah, like the actual transient response of ribbon mics is just beautiful.
Yeah.
The reason I kind of need a little bit more kind of kit sound and mono compatibility from an overhead mic is because I tend to, for a lot of these sounds, like the clients want like the drums to be quite dry. They're not really looking for room.
Yeah.
So I'll tend to mic the overheads like, man, I keep bumping this mic. I tend to mic the overheads like pretty directionally at the cymbals either side of the kit.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking for a directional cymbal sound and that's my stereo image. I'm not looking for a big ambient drum sound in the overheads.
Yep. That makes sense. I'm picturing all this in my head. Like, that's really cool. Very, very cool.
It's a fun setup, this one at the moment. I'm not actually super in love with the overhead sound right now, but it's kind of been working for the stuff I've been tracking. Yeah. I kind of do prefer to get, like, if I'm looking for a natural sound, I want the overheads to be a bit further away.
Gotcha.
And just a bit more kind of drum oriented than cymbal oriented, but it's working for this.
Really cool stuff, man. Man, the sounds you get are so amazing.
Thank you.
Blown away.
And dude, and likewise.
I'll just start clicking through Brody clips and I'm like, damn.
Man, this
Damn.
bass drum, this which you can barely see in the frame,
Yeah.
this 18 by 14 raw steel.
Yeah.
Ugh, stupid drum. Doesn't make a whole lot of sound in the room because it's a small drum.
Yeah.
But it just it throws just the most crazy amount of sub at the kick out mic. It's just nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Like in some of my drum mixes, I'm high passing the drum bus, the mix bus, and sometimes on the actual kick track as well, the kick out track. So like high passing in 2 or 3 different spots.
Okay.
Just so that the limiter at the end of the chain isn't getting just completely blitzed by this kick drum. It's nuts, man. It's so crazy. I think it's the hardest bit about mixing like a hip hop kind of vibe.
Oh, sure.
Getting a huge subby kick drum, but also being able to actually get your mix loud enough.
I just have a quick question that I forgot to get to. Like, do you find yourself often or ever playing or recording acoustic drums to tracks with electronic loops and other loops you have to fit with? What's your approach to that?
Yeah.
Or do you find yourself playing to tracks with 808s or anything like that?
Not normally like normally if I'm playing on something like that, I'm replacing the programmed kick and snare at least. So I guess a lot of the work I'm doing now, actually, like the EP that I've been working on for my friend in Sydney over the last few days, I'm basically replacing all of his programming. And he had decent programming, like the sounds were cool, but we're just replacing it with like a more organic sound. Well, still actually a very heavily processed kind of slightly electronic sound, but more organic playing, I guess. But there's definitely going to be like a lot of percussion loops and that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think a lot of the work that you end up doing is replacing. And that's a lot of the work I've done in the past year or so is people saying, all right, we're kind of getting further along in the prod process of this track, and now we want it to feel a bit better, basically.
Right, that's when it stops sounding like a demo.
Yeah, and like I think there's a lot of records like that. Like I've been sent a lot of tracks, and they're quite often not demos. Like they're quite often a lot of kind of finished tracks, but not necessarily completely. The arrangement's not completely, and the prod's not completely finished.
Yeah.
But like everything that's in there is there with the intention of it being a final track. But what they're looking for is like the loop starts to feel pretty stagnant by the end of the tune. So we actually need you to play a drum part to replace the loop. Maybe only replace the loop in the choruses, but we need movement.
Exactly. And you need what's the opposite of static.
Yeah, exactly. Like you need well, it's quite often dynamics as well. Like you just need you need to accentuate the flow of the tune with some dynamics.
Yeah.
Which is really hard to do in programming. So yeah, but a lot of the time those sessions are going to end up with like, because I find myself like quite often playing like a really sparse hi-hat pattern because I know it's going to be filled out with like a programmed hi-hat or shakers or whatever it may be. And a lot of those sessions, man, like I try and play as tight as I possibly can, and I try and make it feel good without hearing those, like without paying too much attention to those loops. And then I'll either go in and like edit my drums harder to really lock in with those loops if I feel like that's the right way for them to go. Sure. Or I'll actually even say sometimes to the producer, like, I would grab those loops and maybe tighten them up to the drums because the vocal and everything else sounds good with the way the drums feel.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think like a producer that's like really invested in like getting the best possible version of that song, and they want real organic feeling drums on it, that they'll often be open to the idea of moving some of the stuff they've already tracked around.
Yeah.
Because I mean, if your drums are like naturally kind of ebbing and flowing, and you've got like super hard gridded electronic loops, they're going to flam. They're not going to line up all the time. And you can either start to take all the feel out of the drums by hard gridding them, or you could manipulate the loops to fit a little bit better with the drums. So it's about deciding which is the most important, probably the more important part of the arrangement.